You're.
Do I just need to advance it by way of the laptop?
Yeah,
here?
I'd be happy to do it for you, or if you want, you can just hit that
I
down
can
button.
do it. And then,
Yeah.
I don't know.
There you go.
I don't know. If
Yeah, so there's an up and a down button, just.
Well, thanks for introducing yourself to us. We'll introduce ourselves by way of these slides, and this will be very brief, so don't worry, you're not getting stuck here for a half hour listening to us. This is just a short overview of what we do. So Green Play Build handles that community engagement for enduring spaces and places. So a lot of the work we do is actually on the community engagement side and engaging people and having them build their ideal walkable neighborhoods, their ideal livable neighborhoods. So we have them use their hands to build models of what they want to see. So instead of having people just talk about what they want, we have people build what they want. So James is Place It, and I'm Prairie Farm. I started Prairie Farm in my parents' basement in St. Louis Park in 2008. So on the other side of Excelsior Boulevard, so kind of close to where the Trader Joe's is now, but on the other side there. And James started Place It in your mom's house.
Yeah, I was in LA, because I work at LA Metro, on rail lines, and we were working in our two neighborhoods. And we couldn't get we had 40 Latinos in the room, and all we do was nod their head, never talk. So at the same time, we opened up in an art gallery, we had
Here, well, why don't I, so, I just wanna go over what we're gonna talk about, and then you introduce yourself, okay? So, just to give you a sense of what we're gonna talk about, so we'll give a little background of our work, so James started that, so we'll go back to that. And then what I wanna do is talk about the psychology of working with the hands and senses, so a lot of people ask us why we engage people through the hands and senses and not just through talking, so we'll talk about the psychology of that, because that's the main reason it has to do with psychology. And then we'll talk about some applications of the methods. So people are like, okay, great, you do these things, but how do you actually apply them to real projects? So we'll talk about that. And then we'll have a little Q&A for you guys to ask some questions. So we do have this book that just came out last year. We have a few copies, so if you do want to buy it, you can, or there's a discount code, so if you want them all over, feel free. There's a discount code here, and you can order it directly off the IronPress website. But so I'm just going to give a little overview of what we do, but if you want to go more in depth, obviously the book covers a lot more of what we're going to talk about. So go back to your intro.
Oh yeah, so I was working for LA Metro. I grew up in LA is very much not a lot. So I started working at LA Metro, working on the project, a rail project. We would have meetings, free meetings with Latinos. They wouldn't say a word. They would just nod their head. But I knew they had ideas. I knew they had, stories to tell, but communication with language didn't work. So I started reading, at the same time, I opened up an art gallery in downtown Los Angeles, and I worked with artists. And I was amazed by artists to engage people, through their artwork, through their senses, like photography, sculpture, all these things are very much about the body. So I started reading trinkets in meetings, and suddenly people were engaged. Latinos would start to build their cities, what they wanted, and we talked about it, they were happy, they were feeling good. So that's kind of where it all started, and because there was such a need in LA to engage people, this became was in planning. They started working there just to provide nonprofits and like community groups to get them to understand what planning is. And that's kind of how it all started with the previous art space. And it's a really good way to get people just to think about spaces that don't even understand planning at all. They don't even care about it. They start doing this, they start to care, start really about important.
And then this is us in much younger versions of ourselves.
15 years ago.
2007, I think. So this is in James's gallery in downtown Los Angeles. The gallery, unfortunately, is no longer downtown Los Angeles. It's changed quite a bit. But at this time, I was actually working as a city planner and urban designer for the city of Los Angeles. So I went to UCLA for grad school for planning, and then I got a job out of grad school working for the city of Los Angeles. And so I was seeing community engagement from the inside, from the planning side, and seeing basically how awful it could be. So the same people would show up to the meetings, they would say the same things. They would generally say things that had nothing to do with whatever it was that we were talking about. So by the end of my tenure there, so I lasted for 2.5 years. So in 2008, when I left, I really thought community engagement was useless. I just thought it was a total waste of time. and so, but James and I, we were doing, at this time, we would do these events at his gallery. So he would have people build these models, and then I DJ, so I spin house and techno, and I've been doing that since 2003, and so we would have these events where I would DJ, and we would leave these models in the workshop, it just sort of be like a productive party, I guess, but not for any sort of urban planning project, it wasn't for something that, like anything super tangible. But over time, we actually started doing work together and weaving these methods into actual urban planning, landscape, transportation projects, and this is now the work that we do, and this is how we make our money. So since then we've added to the roster of the different methods that we use. So we do these sensory-based walking tours, which you can see right here. We do these things called weed walkabouts, where we explore weeds growing in cracks and sidewalks, kind of document this spontaneous nature that occurs all around us. These are hand building during one of the model building workshops. And then we've added all sorts of other methods. But the main thing is we're all trying to engage people through the hands and senses. That's what we're trying to do. This is a life-size plaza prototyping event we did in Long Beach and SoCal. So we were working with Habitat for Humanity actually down there, and they're doing more work in urban planning. So in a place like Los Angeles that's really built out, there isn't a lot of available land. If there is available land, it's not going to be a house, it's going to be multifamily housing or something like that. So they're shifting their model a little bit in these places and training residents to be urban planners so that they can advocate for their urban planning ideas, visions in their communities. So they brought us in to lead residents in this lower income Latino neighborhood in these model building activities and how to advocate for their planning ideas. And then they kept saying they wanted a plaza, and we identified an actual place for a plaza to be. So we got all these life-size, well, they're not really life-size objects. We got, furniture, we got trees donated by the city, all sorts of things. And then this is one of the participants, this guy's like 11 years old, super into, so they could design their own plaza with all these life-size objects, materials. So just about the psychology of working with the hands and senses. So a lot of people ask why you work with the hands and senses. And so is anyone here a psychology major? Okay, so you are?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes.
okay, all right. So usually no one raises their hand, so this will be very basic. So if you're like, oh, this is pretty simplified. It's just to kind of give an overview. But when we talk, especially in the community engagement setting, so when we're up in front of the people or at a podium, the part of our brains is fired up is the prefrontal cortex, and this is the least creative part of our brains. This is the part of our brains that keeps us focused on survival, it keeps us focused on ourselves. This is the part of our brains that's not fully formed until around 25, 26. So this is why it's much easier when you're younger than that to imagine things and just have more of an imagination and be expansive and do thinking, because this part of your brain hasn't come online completely, so it's not hampering your imagination. Yeah, so in the community meeting setting, this is the part of your brain that gets fired up. And this is why in a community meeting setting, we tend to, when we talk about what we want, we tend to focus on things that have to do with ourselves and that have to do with what we either have to do with survival or what we perceive to survive in that moment. So this is why people tend to say the same thing. So you ask what they want, they'll say, well, we want more parking, right? We want less traffic, and we definitely don't want any more housing. These are the most common things that you hear at a community meeting. And what happens then is we conclude wrongly that that's all people care about. Right? So the only things people care about are parking, traffic, and density, and beyond that, they don't have any concerns. Kind of what David was saying earlier, he knew that folks regarding this rail line had ideas, they had opinions, but he just couldn't figure out a way to get those opinions, ideas out of them. I put this in because I think this is true for a lot of Americans. We think of democracy in the US as standing on a soapbox and speaking your mind, and that's great, right? It can be great. But a lot of times it translates into this, right? It's like angry guy, could be an angry woman, an angry person at a community meeting who tends to dominate the community meeting. They're disruptive, they kind of ruin it for everyone else. And what ends up happening is that we think that because this guy spoke or whoever it is, they spoke and maybe a couple other people spoke and no one else, that these are the only people who have any concerns and no one else cares. Does anyone in this room love public speaking? Does anyone wake up in the morning and think like, yes? Okay. I'm not surprised. And that's totally fine. So usually one person will eagerly do this or someone will kind of do this, but most people don't love public speaking, and that's actually totally normal. And psychologists attribute this to the fact that when we live out in the wild, if something was staring at you, it meant that it wanted to kill you. That, like, very bluntly, that's what it was, right? So you're up in a field, there's some animal that locks eyes with you, and that animal is like, I'm gonna kill you, right? So we still have this primal fear inside of us. So when we're speaking up in front of a group, all eyes are on us. We don't like that. And so on a rational level, of course, we know that most likely the people in the room don't want to kill you, right? But on more of a primal emotional level, we feel uncomfortable, right? And that's very normal. So that's why most people don't like public speaking. It's just not normal as humans to want to be up in front of a group of people and be stared at, right? So one method that you guys have probably learned is to scan over people's heads, you know, so instead of looking straight at people, I do scan over their heads so you're not looking at them. Now going back to this photo though, obviously this guy doesn't care about this, like he's the carnivore, right? He's like, I'm gonna kill you before you kill me. Most of us aren't like that. That's not like, you know, great. So some of us come into the world that way, most of us don't. And so we want to make room for everyone, no matter what their comfort level is with speaking in front of a group. Want to make sure everyone has an opportunity to participate. So that's our objective, is to really get people out of survival mode and also get them into a space where they feel comfortable expressing themselves and they don't feel like they have to be aggressive in order to get their point across, or they have to engage in some sort of conflict with people to get their point across. Because that's the other thing, going back to this, like, especially in a place like Minnesota, it's a very conflict averse place. You mentioned Cambridge and Boston, slightly different out there. So people are much more they're ready for a fight sometimes, whereas here that's definitely not the case. And so we're trying to really honor people's comfort levels and the way that they communicate and the way that they're comfortable communicating. And so that's what we try to do. And so that's why we have people work with their hands and senses, because they can tap into their creative side, and we fire up a completely different part of our brains. So it's the part of our brains that allows us to be creative, allows us to be expansive with our thinking. And then we can sink into the state of play and essentially be like kids again, but in a really productive way. And we can be aspirational and imagine worlds that look different from the world that we live in now, but be okay with that. We feel like we have we're taking part in the creation of that future.
People are happier too.
They're happy, they're
I'm happy cities.
and people collaborate too. So it's much easier to collaborate with others when you work with your hands than it is when you sit around a table and just talk. So a lot of times what happens if you engage in a conversation around something that might be kind of heated or it's a contentious issue, people tend to push each other's ideas out of the way. And when you work with your hands, people literally make room for other people's ideas in whatever space it is that people are building. And then the cool thing is you can tap into what you really care about. So instead of just parking, traffic, and density, people tap into values like friends, family, nature, discovery, all the things that really matter to us. So just a brief overview of some of the applications of the methods. So we do a lot of work on transportation systems, transit design, station design. James, you want to talk about this project?
Just a project we did a couple of years ago. The city of Phoenix built a recreation center for people with disabilities. And right across the street is a rail line. There was no rail stop. Most people with disabilities have to use public transportation. They can't afford these fancy cars. So I did a workshop there like 5 years or 6 years ago where I had everybody build their ideal station based on disability, whatever that was. So they built these stations and they talked about it and they were so excited because this was gonna help their life. I need this station. For 5 years, they lobbied the mayor's office, they lobbied the transit authority to get a station built. That's really hard. People, I think the time they find they like to build infill stations, they work really hard to get them built. And the designs of the stations kind of reflects, they come up with, they wanted like a mystery, they wanted really wide platforms, where two folks in a wheelchair could go down together. The very low floor, they wanted plans, they wanted artwork, and it was kind of shade, you got that in the station there. It's probably one of the prettiest stations in the Phoenix system. But it's up below them advocating for this because it's, because they built their solutions to their problems and they needed it for part of their life. You know, where I think a lot of planners always say, I got your answers already, but people don't care, right? But they do it themselves, they really care. So they changed it, now they have access to the station.
We also do a lot with urban design, and active transportation, so walkability, bikeability, creating space that allow people to move through them in a lot of different ways. This is a project we did in SoCal, in a lower income Latino community, and through the hands-on modeling activities we did with them, the sensory-based walking tours, they kept saying that they wanted plazas, places for gathering. And I think that's a recurring theme in so many American cities. We don't have a lot of just places where you can just be and just hang out, where you don't have to buy anything. You can just sit, relax, a public square. So this was the design that we came up with. And this is actually getting built now. So this is going to be a plaza in the neighborhood. And so we do a lot with town centers, libraries, housing. The interesting thing with a lot of the housing projects we do is that when people build their ideal housing with the model building materials that we provide them, they tend to focus on shared spaces instead of their own private personal spaces. So they'll start with the shared spaces first. Maybe they'll build their own unit and how they imagine it, but they usually don't. They usually build just shared spaces, which obviously is very familiar to all of you because we're in co-housing right now, right? But essentially people do build various permutations on co-housing. That's a lot of times what people will just naturally build when they work with their hands. Whereas if you ask them what they want, they'll talk about their own apartment, right? Or their own house. Right?
In the survey, it's all about you personally.
Yeah.
But I think it's really important to teach people how to collaborate. A lot of people don't really know how to collaborate, so when they work with their hands, they can really work together, collaborate, be happy, and see the strength of collaboration. I just did a workshop with 90 high school girls in Los Angeles. You know, they remember when, remark was that they learned how to collaborate.
Yeah.
You know, so that's such a hard skill. Yeah, but at 20, you can do it really easily.
So, do you know what the co-housing stands for?
I don't. I just sort of collaborative. Collaborative. Yeah, I had never thought about it before. I've taken the CO for granted. So
Yeah.
that project that we did in Oregon, we just talked to the developer. So this is basically a town center for a town that hasn't had a center, essentially. So kind of like Southdale, any dynamo is supposed to be a town center for a town without a center. But so what people ended up building was the plaza area first. That's what they wanted, and they wanted like job incubator spaces. So let's say you're like a baker, but you don't have the money to start up an entire bakery. You'll have a little incubator space in there. So he said it was interesting with this project because instead of starting with the units again themselves, he started with the shared spaces.
And this was basically the big box development, so like a Fred Meyer's, big supermarket. Then it just put out a business there, hopefully I don't think anything.
Yeah. And then we do a lot of work with planning departments and general plan, specific plans. This is a project we actually did in Tempe, Arizona, or Tempe, as they say there. And this is at Legoland. So Legoland offered local space. So we did a model building workshop with, ended up being 170 people. So it was I think it was the largest workshop we've ever done. It was a little stressful, because there was a lot of pandemonium going on. And there were literally kids running around in circles while we were doing the workshop. I don't know what happened to it's like the monitor went gone to sleep here.
Is it a green color button? I mean, remote.
Is it, yeah, it's.
Oh, I did that.
Oh.
No, no problem.
So.
There we go. Okay.
Yeah, so Legoland, was fun because Legoland, approached the city and said, if you can use our space for meetings. So they did, and so a lot of people that showed up wanted to go to Legoland. And go to meetings, so it was a really fun workshop.
Good.
Now you have to change it back to the input for the
Should we have
HDMI.
to save the input again?
Yep, on the remote.
Top left.
HG limit.
Yeah, try tapping the keyboard.
There we go. All right, anyway, so, we did this at Legoland. And, this was actually for the general plan 2050 for the city of Tempe, so this was outlining the collective vision for what people want to see for the Tempe in the future. The people built things like, community gardens, more water, more tree canopy, more bikeable streets, more walkable streets, multi-sensory spaces, multi-generational spaces. So and it was funny because the city, and this happens a lot, we work with cities, they'll warn us, well, there are 50 people who are gonna show up to the meeting, they're gonna basically ruin the meeting, so just so you know, and you guys are gonna be in charge, so. Give it to us, but it never ends up happening. So people don't end up ruining these meetings because they're working with their hands instead of just talking. And then, a lot of what we talk about are tangible outcomes, but there are all these intangible outcomes that come out of these processes that we use. So increasing trust between cities and residents, increasing trust amongst residents of a community, such as a community like this one. And bringing out people's inner creativity and inner planning skills. Everyone has these skills within them. It's just a question of how we bring them out to people. And then, of course, there are just these everyday applications. So I've talked about a lot of things that don't happen that often in people's lives. So it's not like we are involved in a park project every day or involved in building a new building every day. These are also things that you can just use with people you live with friends, family, neighbors, coworkers, to do some sort of bonding activity. The model building activity you guys could do all together, and you probably learn a whole bunch of things about each other that you didn't know about, even though you lived with each other for a long time.
Yeah, in fact, we did workshops in Hillsborough, Oregon, for Latinos. We do workshops. Latinos came to, Latinos came to all the meetings because they wanted to hear the story of everybody else. So the way for them to connect, was a way for them to connect with other people to these meetings. And since you're taking away people's personal interest or people's property values, it becomes a lot happier. Nobody's thinking about themselves, it's something good. And the public, and you know, what was that for me rather than my personal interest. It really makes a big difference taking that out of the equation. People actually different.
Another thing too is as we get older, we have less of an opportunity to think big and just to be expansive with our thinking. We're much more constrained by reality. We don't work with our hands as much. So there is just intrinsic value in being able to do this on a physical and emotional level, to be able to think big, work with your hands. By the end of these workshops, you just automatically feel better about yourself. And you just have a sense of kind of possibility and positivity.
So we do take people through a whole kind of journey of how to understand their physical being and the world around them. We have them build a favorite child memory as the first activity. So they tell people, you can't, maybe you can't read a map or don't speak English or they don't understand planning. But that memory, that happy moment, is your DNA for the rest of your life. You can look for it over and over and over again. So when they build that memory with objects, they realize that memory had a tree, it had water, it had flowers, it had some kind of material to it. And they see the value in that. you just say, okay, now I know what makes me happy. And now that's why they came to, I did a workshop one time where a woman said, her mother would take her down to Mexico and she go to tidal pools. So she became a biologist, just from doing that, connected that to comfort zone. That's that kind of trick. So it's really good to understand how important that is, and how to understand that the built environment does matter. It can make you happy, it can make you feel good, but people just don't really make that connection. And when we build it, they can really talk about that. It gives them a really solid, this is what I want.
So that's, we're gonna stop there. We don't want to take too much time from folks of the evening. This is our contact info. If you want to get in touch with us. or call us. And our contact info, we have cards as well. So we can provide those for you. And I'll leave this up, but we can answer any questions that folks have.
I was just curious, I mean, this for spaces and places and so forth, so it's using hands-on tools and learning to create sort of visual spaces. Can you use this kind of hands-on thing for more abstract things that don't involve design spaces?
Yes, yeah, in fact, we just had someone. And I need to make sure I can remember, it was very complicated. A woman who actually works for HGA Architects in downtown Minneapolis, she did it as a way, they built models of their equitable HGA of the future. And like policies and programming and all these things. So it wasn't spatial, literally, it was really about more about policies moving forward and relationships and that kind of thing. So yes.
Okay, so like we may even a budget discussion, something like that, or.
Yeah, absolutely, because it's a lot of times it's so much easier. Another thing, I didn't put this up here, but we could talk about other projects we've done, but one of the things we're doing now is bringing music into the work we do. So I'll DJ while Jay completes the modeling activities, but it's getting people into this flow state so they can sink into this zone and get creative. It's also a way for people to tap into this subconscious knowledge that they have that you can't tap into through just talking. Right. So when all of us as human beings, we're always trying to regulate a balance between newness and sameness in our lives, and so that threshold, what feels too new or what feels too much the same, it's very different for everyone depending on if you've traveled a lot, if you've lived in a lot of places, what feels new to you might be over here, whereas if you have stayed in one place your whole life, it might be over here, right? But as a result of that, of our bodies regulating this, keeping us within this window of comfort, is that we have all the sensory knowledge inside of us, we access that through our hands. It's harder for us to access that through just talking, because a lot of times we don't know if we even have that. So even with something like a budget, you could access all this kind of innate knowledge that you have by way of your hands that you couldn't just through this very rational way of approaching it.
Yeah, there's a woman in Minneapolis, I actually worked at the University of Minnesota. They have this all kind of service community departments. And they would use this workshop to work with Pennington County, Ramsey County on food issues, on just a lot of service issues. It was a good way for people just to be able to express themselves a different way. All you do is give people different language for it. And sometimes these issues are really complicated. They can express them a lot better with objects and try to talk about it. They worked with these naughty high school girls. So it was easy for them to build their city and talk about that thing. There's so much intangible that we experience in space that there's no word for it. That's why I think for a lot of the planners are trained to look at numbers and data, and they want to know a space, but they don't want to feel the space. Most people live in space, it's about a feeling. So how do you talk about that feeling? I like that neighborhood, but why do you like it? Build it and tell us why you like it. Be a lot easier. A lot of times these intangibles that people can express become easier to express objects. Like the yellow thing is warm, or like red thing because it's happy, or whatever it is. Association with color is better when I was a kid.
Yes.
Well, some of the photographs you showed me reminded me that between Minneapolis and St. Paul, there used to be this Rondo neighborhood. It got split by 94. They're now talking about building a whole thing over a chunk of that Rondo neighborhood. You have any comments about what, or are you guys working with them or?
We're not working on that project, but we definitely have worked on projects, park projects, you know, where people are trying to figure out what their ideal park is and stitching neighborhoods back together.
Yeah, because they're trying to rebuild that community that the black people had.
Yeah.
Got wiped out.
Yeah, the fact that working in right now in Seattle. They're trying to take down a highway in South Park. And they got this federal funding to do a study, removing the highway in South Park. I just did a workshop with Spanish and English. You know, on what that should look like. And I think the whole approach is really thinking about, you know, what do people want in their neighborhood and their community? And how can that removing the freeway or turning it over can enhance their life? If people just think, well, you can cover the freeway, well, who cares? But if you see it as part of their life, they can have a park there, a store there, a school there, and look at that there. And I need this because they have it, they can advocate for it. Let's really get people involved in their needs and aspirations for these kind of projects. Yeah, we just did a workshop, like 2 weeks ago.
Yes.
How much does your book cost?
It's $20 with the discount, so I think it's 20, what is it normally? Anyways, but you get it for 20, there's a 20% discount, yes. Yes.
Has anybody tried this modeling technique, this workshop technique in the wet sand at the beach?
That's a good question. Yeah.
I think one of the beauties of the materials that you have, a variety of texture, shapes, and colors. So that really triggers people's emotions and memories and aspirations. It's like, somebody might say like yellow things, like purple things, like red things. And sometimes one time a woman, the person told me, you don't have enough natural things here. I told her, well, go outside, pick up rocks and leaves and spread and build her community, if that's what you want to do, and she did. But most people it's a really quick process, and we just it takes like maybe an hour and a half max, you know, start to finish. So it's really quick. So it's really kind of getting, kind of really pulling up people's, really people's triggers and their emotions. They're just having all the stuff, really kind of does that. You know, to do it. So I think the beach might be something that might be kind of, you know, feel like water or sand. You're probably not going to debate, so yeah. That would be a fun thing to do.
Yes.
My project involves figuring out what kind of a building, if any, to get for a church, but my question is,
Yes.
so I'm definitely, my brain is turning around with
Yeah.
possibilities there, but I'm curious a little bit about like, how did the pandemic impact things, you know, everything
Yeah.
went online, and I
Good question.
personally am doing, you know, I'm on the board, and before the pandemic, we always met in person and then we met online, and now we're continuing to meet online because that's more convenient for everyone. So is there any
You can ask Ian.
equivalent to,
We did workshop online to the director watch.
Yeah, I think that it's a more fulfilling experience to be in person
sure.
if you possibly can, but yeah, James and John can kind of communicate the key elements of the experience, and you've done that. You've had people in their rooms,
Yeah,
in their homes, pull together objects
Yeah.
and build things as part of in Zoom rooms.
yeah, it's interesting because people, before the pandemic, we started shifting into virtual and Zoom, and people were in their homes doing their memories and objects, but we find is that people have so many objects that have memories and stories. That people are pulling out their baby blankets, their first book ever read. You know, all these objects they carry around with them, so you realize that people's safe space is a collection of objects and memories. And that's how they kind of face their space. So how do we bring the kind of same kind of memory and story and and kind of connection to the public outside. But yeah, it's kind of different, you get a different spin when people use their own objects. They'll tell a story about the object.
I think I asked you, did you send them like a box
Oh,
with
yeah.
all of the
Oh, yeah,
objects in? And you said, maybe we thought about that, but no,
Yeah.
people just found the objects that were right for them.
Yeah, we just had, it's like, we just had them use objects from their homes or their offices. They built the same, we use the same prompts that we would have used for the in-person events, but just had them use objects from the home. We also translated the sensory-based walking tours that we give, so that, let's see where that goes.
Yeah.
So we do these sensory-based walking tours, we'll have people explore a street or a neighborhood or park or something with their senses. And a lot of times it's a space that people are familiar with on a certain level, but they've never explored it with their senses. And so you can experience a space you're familiar with in a totally different way. Because a lot of times we're walking down the street or walking through space, it's because we have an objective and a purpose, right? We're walking the dog or we have to get to a certain place. But when you shift that and so you let your senses be the guide, you start to totally notice all of these details and things that you never noticed before. We shifted that actually to an online format. So when we were working with Habitat for Humanity, what we had people do is go to their favorite place in their neighborhood and film themselves talking about why they like that place. So it could have been a sidewalk, a park, you name it. They found the spot that they loved in the neighborhood, and so they just filmed themselves talking about it. They told us why. And then I spliced all of the videos together into a walking tour, quote unquote, which we went on, which meant, we all watched the tour online. And then after that, people built models of their ideal neighborhood, right, from that walking tour. And it did totally work, it was enough to get people into the sensing state and get their minds going, their creative sides going, so when they did build the models. They were able to infuse all these sensory impressions from what they had seen and what they've been a part of into their models. But like Ian said, the in-person, I think this is true for so many things, it's just the in-person workshops are more effective in part because of what happens at the end, which is that there's this spillover where people who've met during the workshops, or maybe they already knew each other, but they learned things about each other. There's a spillover where people mingle and talk and connect and talk about projects that they're working on and or a project they might want to work on or someone they want to collaborate with, right? And there's so much value in that, and a lot of that's just serendipity and chance. Whereas with the online ones, when James and I started giving talks in the book after it came out, this was still kind of the tail end of the pandemic, so everything we were doing was online. And we would give a talk where we could see a number right here. It would be like 500 people, and then it would end, and then you just close your laptop, sitting in your room by yourself. It's just a very alienating experience. So long story short, yes, you can do them virtually for sure, and they're fun. People appreciated them. They said they were way more fun than just sitting staring at a screen because they're working with their hands. But if you can do them in person, it's better. Yeah.
I was thinking more like, is there a way to say, infuse a little bit of something into a regular meeting? So we're sort of stuck in the online space and that's where we want to be.
Yeah.
So would there be something that I could incorporate hands-on in some way that might make us more creative during the meetings? That's what
Absolutely. You could have them do a quick modeling activity where they just gather objects from their kitchen or wherever they are and just give them a prompt, something that's relevant to what they're doing, or it could be what James is saying, build a favorite childhood memory.
First mobility experience.
Or whatever it is that you think would be helpful. The memory activity, we always start with the memory. So we do work with, we always start with the memory-based activities. We want to take people back to a time when they felt a sense of belonging, a sense of wonder, joy, you name it. And so that act of rebuilding that experience puts you into that headspace again, and it completely changes the dynamic or the dynamic of the virtual world. Oh, we're not.
Yeah, but get back, but it's interesting because most of our clients are women. And a lot of them, because they have a lot of confession themselves, especially when it comes to walking. And we've been doing a lot of workshops with women on walking, and they'll say, "Look, husband, I walk this way, on yourself, I like that. Or why? Build that scenario, and they build it. Because and then we did a walking tour one time, in Oakland, Berkeley, it was like. Basically 25 women over the age of 60. They're probably felt very unsafe walking down the street. Because there were so many triggers go through a woman's head and walk down the street. And men, we didn't realize that, but you know, the shade, the darkness, all these things, so a lot of women kind of a problem like that. You know, so to do the workshop, they could really start to kind of impact that whole feeling. Visit the makes me feel unsafe. You know, so how would you build a safe street? Because women told us one time that if the BART station, not like you're in, it means the man is drunk, misbehaving, exposing himself, she's out of there. That's meant now. You know, so it's small details, all these red flags is being triggered all the time out there, so it's really, so there's not many planning tools that we use to address that kind of sensory knowledge about spaces. So if you can't do a map, you're not just gonna go to meetings, you know, but I think when you have kind of format, you can really start to design things that really work for you with these objects.
So when these older women talk about a place where they can take a walk safely, do they talk about things like eliminate blind areas where or provide me visibility so I can see everything?
Yeah, visibility.
Surprise me.
Visibility is important, lighting is important. You know, in fact, I did workshops where second night with high school kids. I told them build a male space in the city, and tell us why it's male. The basketball court, the airport, the dark alley, the dark space, and now how did you make that space a female space? Lighting, plants, trees, comfort, beauty. So they know they stand to detail, they stand to things. And they know it, so it's just kind of asking them what will make that space be so comfortable to you. For flowers, you know, where things are smelling good. Because all of their triggers for your well-being.
And other people around, I think that's a big one too.
Yeah,
It's just
yeah.
like lots of other people around, so you're not the only person.
Yeah.
Yes.
So once you reawaken people's creativity and, you know, with memories from their youth or whatever, and they're working on their own little projects, then you try to have a project created by bringing everybody's ideas together to create something that's like a community size.
Yeah, that's a part two. Part two is team building. So everybody works together, everybody works together in teams, like 4 or 5 people, and now build your ideas based on your memory. They work together and build their ideal communities. And now people have something to build with, to build on. A lot of times in a meeting, people say, well, I don't want to. So therefore they really can't be part of the process. When they have their memory, they know exactly what kind of emotion they want to achieve in their community, or the street, the park, the buildings, and they can build it in there.
And it sort of sounds like, from what you said earlier, that a lot of times the same themes come up, is that right? And what people say is their ideal community, and would you mind just sort of, you know, what are some of the things that you do over and over again?
Well, so what we always do is we have people, the participants themselves pull the recurring themes out of the models that everyone's built. So your question about the second activity, so we'll have people work in groups of 4 or 5, and they'll build a model of, you know, whatever it is that we're working on. So a neighborhood, a park, a transit station. But they're all gonna be different, and so we'll have people pull out the recurring themes of all the models, like the things that tie all the models together. And likewise with the memory exercise as well, we do that, and that's really important, especially when we do these projects. Like with the Arizona one in Tempe, you know, you have all these folks coming in. They are strangers, or they might think that they know these people, and they might have negative opinions of the people, right? Of people they've seen at these meetings over and over again. So you want to get everyone into that happier space by way of memory, but you also want people to start to see that they have things in common, right? So people walk into the room, they assume they're all strangers, they have nothing in common. We have them pull the recurring themes out of the memories, and then they start to say, okay, well, and those are the core values that you're referring to. So a lot of them have to do with things like, the biggest one probably is nature. No matter where we are, what age group we do this activity with, it's nature being outside. Animals, water. So, I think most people in these activities, it's also a way for people to realize like, oh, actually. Those are the things that I care about. There's this other stuff that clutters up my life that's really not that important. Right, so, nature, friends, family, discovery, exploration, walking. And it's pretty much, across the country, no matter where we do these are the things that keep coming up, and a lot of times, what people wanna see in their communities and the core values they have are not reflected in the infrastructure that we have. Right, so like when you guys were introducing yourselves tonight, and people were saying, well, I'd like to walk more, I'd like to be able to walk, to get my groceries instead of just taking a walk. That's a very good example of that, right? So we have this infrastructure that doesn't allow us to do what we really want to do. And that doesn't reflect what our values are. That's like one of the biggest frustrations of being an American. If you are at all interested in walking and transit, these kinds of things, is that we have so much infrastructure that just doesn't reflect these wants and values that we have. So.
But having people kind of discover it on their own, I can tell you, you're not gonna be able to say, but I want them to figure it out.
Yeah.
So the whole idea is like, you should do a workshop with people all over the world. And they'll have the same thing. The number one time they workshop, and the woman from Korea said, a little girl, she'd like to watch the cherry tree 17 floors below her building. That one cherry tree was like her nature, right? So another person might say, I planted a creek in my backyard. So it's kind of, if you see how nature gets weaved into people's childhoods, you'll look for it. The ground under the garden, a flower I smell all the time, worm I picked up as I go to school. And people realize that, it's this kind of state of being that kind of makes a memory. It's not the toys they had. People never talk about all the toys they had. Never talk about that. So it's just kind of moment in time that they remember, right? And they can pull it up and rectify that. That's amazing about it. So it's really good, like, these people are going with quickly. You don't have to worry about like people not knowing that. They know how to do this.
Well, thanks for your time. Thanks for the questions. Yeah. Appreciate it.
Want to pass the books around so people can